watching our video recording. So we're recording this on Thursday, April 28th, and we're here live. And this is the monthly meeting of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. And I am going to share my screen. We're going to have a few updates about what's going on with passenger rail as it affects our region. And as usual, there's a lot of things going on. So it'll take me a few minutes to do this. And then we hope to have really some open discussion about the direction of the coalition and some of the things that we're working on. So here's a little bit of our contact information. We do have the website, westwisconsinrail.org, where you can join if you're not already a member. We'd appreciate that. Also, we have Facebook and Twitter activity. And if you've missed any of our previous meetings, we do post the recordings on YouTube. And last month we had Rick Harnish from the High Speed Rail Alliance with us with a very interesting discussion. So if you go to our website, westwisconsinrail.org, and go to the video, there's a link for videos of previous meetings. You can go there and take a look at those. Recap who we are. We are interested in the region we call West Central Wisconsin, which is essentially the corridor from Eau Claire and Chippewa counties to the west through Menominee, Baldwin, Hudson River Falls, on into the Twin Cities. And our mission is to develop passenger rail service through our region as part of a strategy to assure a balanced transportation system for long-term sustainable growth. Here's a list of our officers and directors. We are a 501c3 educational organization, and we were initially created by the Momentum Chippewa Valley Economic Development Organization, which itself grew into a 10-county region. And of course, we cover the whole region all the way over to the Twin Cities. And looking at some of our goals, there are state rail plans in Minnesota that you see here that include in Eau Claire to Twin Cities corridor, the Wisconsin State Rail Plan. The long-term vision includes a connection for passenger rail service through our region. And then recently, the Amtrak Connects Us plan, where they're looking at how could the Amtrak system be expanded, includes a line through our area as far as through Chicago to Twin Cities services. And then more also recently, last fall, the Federal Railroad Administration released its Midwest Regional Rail Plan Network, in which they included a Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Twin Cities route as one of the highest potential future corridors, including eventual Core Express, which would be true high-speed rail as well as other service within that corridor. As we've worked since the late 90s to try to see passenger rail service move forward and start serving our area, over the last few years, we've dug into how that might happen and what kind of innovations and progress might be taken advantage of. We see things like the Brightline service in Florida, where the real estate development and the activity around stations help make the service possible. We see communities like Normal, Illinois, where they have a multi-frequency passenger train corridor, created a new train station, and renewed downtown area around that. Have seen over $200 million in additional investment in that area. And then we've looked at how commissions and authorities and others are able to advance passenger rail service in their regions, and in some cases be the operating sponsor for service. And then innovative ways like the Hartford line in Connecticut, where a different approach was taken by a state to implement additional service on one of their lines. So as we look at what is our vision and what could we have for passenger rail service for our area, we've looked at these multiple things. One is frequent regional service between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, through service between Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Twin Cities being part of that corridor. That might include additional TCMC frequencies. TCMC is the letters that are being used for Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago, as Wisconsin and Minnesota work on that corridor. Additional train coming through La Crosse in the next 2 years, but also a possibility of some future services operating through our area, as well as linking in the Midwest, FRA Midwest Plan and the infrastructure bill. And then perhaps more immediately, throughway shuttle connections from our corridor to cities on existing Amtrak stations, such as a Chippewa Valley to Toma shuttle when the second train on the current route gets rolling. I'm going to come back to this at the end of the meeting, but we introduced this in previous meetings and at our board of directors. How do we advance our objectives and how do we organize the efforts of the Rail Coalition? One is we have the new Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission among the counties and municipalities that's been formed and is starting to move forward. And what is our relationship with them? What role do we take? What role do they take? And then organizing some of the tasks that we would have to advance the things we're advocating for, such as communications, working on public-private partnerships, transportation planning, legislative relations, and then things like pursuing the shuttle and transit connections and working with groups that have complementary goals along with us. A lot of the background there is that we did have the bipartisan infrastructure law passed last year by Congress and signed by the president. What's interesting about that, this is a graphic from FRA, and I won't try to dig into it, but some of the big information, big things here are the $66 billion in advanced appropriations. So typically, if you follow how things work in the federal government, you have authorization bills which say, okay, here's what you can do and here's what we authorize you to go forward with. And then every year Congress has to decide, okay, are we going to fund that? And sometimes you have money that's authorized, but you don't get all of that money in the annual appropriations. What this bill did is for the first 5 years, the $66 billion is actually advanced appropriations. Those are not subject to the annual appropriations. Then there is an additional $36 billion that they authorized over those 5 years that could come through the regular appropriations process. So as we look forward and see this rolling out, we are in the middle of the first year of this. So the advanced appropriation is in effect and FRA is gearing up to make that happen. And you can see at the bottom the different buckets that is made up of. Some of it does go directly to Amtrak, but significant parts of it really are open and discretionary and competitive. And for instance, the federal state partnership for intercity passenger rail is the largest bucket among that $66 billion. And then the authorized funds, the new appropriation bill that was finally passed for this fiscal year by Congress did authorize additional funds for this fiscal year. And just to give you a perspective of how much of a game changer this is a chart FRA put out on what its funding has been for passenger rail going back to fiscal year 2009. 2009 was the stimulus bill that you may remember back then, and really jumped the funding quite a bit that year and somewhat the following year. But then you see that we have pretty small amounts all the way through the 2010s. And then as we get to fiscal year 2022, as you can see over these 5 years, the money goes up substantially, and there's going to be a lot of capacity to do passenger rail, at least from a funding standpoint. Part of that process is the corridor identification and development program that FRA was tasked to put together. They solicited public comment, which we talked last month about. We provided some, and our understanding is that they will be coming out with that process of how that will be implemented probably next month. Another important development for our region and staking the public side of it, we've always had great support on resolutions and other interests from our counties and municipalities along the line. And we had these 3 counties, St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire, and the municipalities of Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson all pass resolutions here during the pandemic, which has made it harder to get things started, but really to form a commission to advance passenger rail service. That commission has picked up its activities again. It met just this week on Monday afternoon and did pass bylaws to move forward, and its next meeting will be in May, is still being determined. But here are the purposes that are included in the bylaws. So the purpose is to advance the public interest by pursuing passenger rail service and other public transportation improvements in the St. Croix and Chippewa Valley. So in our area, we refer to the St. Croix Valley to be St. Croix, Pierce, and Polk counties generally, and the Chippewa Valley to be Dunn, Chippewa, and Eau Claire counties. So there's a lot of economic activity between our areas and the Twin Cities, as well as a desire to go to the east as well to Milwaukee, Madison, and Chicago. So you can see that the purpose of the commission is to identify benefits, facilitate initiatives to implement it, pursue opportunities for transit-oriented development and other issues related to stations, to foster cooperation with other governments, agencies, work across the states, work with state DOTs and others, look at things and coordinate zoning, environmental, safety, regulatory related requirements, and then also to participate in planning processes such as state rail plans, FRA Midwest Corridor Study, local MPO, and certainly when this was written, the IIJA's corridor identification program did not exist, but that would be the sort of thing. Membership in the commission officially for voting purposes are the government organizations that have joined it. There is a provision for ex officio members. You see this with a lot of commissions where you bring in other stakeholders. And so as the commission has its next meeting, we will certainly be talking to them about how they will involve rail advocacy, the railroad, local education, economic development, et cetera. So that'll be something to come forward on the commission. I think what I want to do is go through the update, and then we can come back and talk about any of these things or answer any questions. We did talk about this last month, but it's important to note that the Chicago Milwaukee Twin Cities second train on the current route has now been fully funded, and the Amtrak, the states, and the Canadian Pacific Railroad are actively working to get that implemented. Initially and officially, they've been saying 2024, but and this is the route that we're talking about. The Amtrak's recent agreement with Canadian Pacific does allow the service to start sooner, but there still are many things to get in place to make it be able to happen, such as equipment, operating agreements, et cetera. But Arun Rao from WSDOT does continue to say that they do expect it to start much sooner than 2024. We'll just have to sit tight and see how soon they can get that done. The other piece of that is similar to what's been successful in California. They are working on shuttle connections to places like Rochester, Eau Claire, and Madison as part of implementation of that service, much as they've already done now for the Hiawatha service up to the Fox Cities and Green Bay. And last year, this is actually a slide that Arun showed us as far as if the shuttle service could begun to connect with both current trains, the Empire Builder and the new train. This is a sample of a kind of schedule we could see where perhaps someone could buy a ticket, get on a shuttle in Menominee or Eau Claire. It would include your transfer at Toma, and you could go on to Milwaukee or Chicago and other parts of the Amtrak system and vice versa. Another recent development, if you follow and try to travel by train these days, Amtrak has had some significant staff and equipment shortages related to the pandemic, partly because they furloughed a lot of employees when they cut service to 3 days a week on many of the long distance services. Earlier this year, they announced that most of the long distance trains would only run 5 days a week instead of 7 for 2 months, and then they extended that again into the end of May. They did just announce a few days ago that many of the long distance trains are now going to go back to daily service. So the Empire Builder across Wisconsin was one of those trains. It was not leaving Chicago or Seattle or Portland on Thursdays and Fridays, which meant through Wisconsin, there was no westbound train on Thursday and Friday and no eastbound train on Saturday and Sunday. They did announce that as of May the week of May 23rd, the Empire Builder will be one of those trains going back to full daily service. The City of New Orleans and the Crescent are going to continue 5 days a week, at least through into September. So that is a development that that you may be interested in, particularly if you're trying to buy a train ticket to go to Chicago or Milwaukee or the West Coast. We also know that Amtrak, when we had our Chippewa Valley Rally in Madison in February, and this has been confirmed by Run as well, that we do know that Amtrak is doing analysis of the Connexus routes in Wisconsin, such as running through Eau Claire, service to Madison, service to Green Bay. They are handling that, and we don't know the timing, but we are probably a number of weeks away from hearing what comes out from Amtrak on that. And one other development with Amtrak or questions that have been asked, Amtrak's own Inspector General did raise some questions given their service issues right now and how much work is going to be involved in expanding the system. Is how can they handle all that? Are they going to have the horsepower to do that? And we'll see as that moves forward. So somewhat related to that, we've talked in the past about the possibility of working with private contractors to operate the service between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities in particular, but perhaps other services in the state and other places in the country. We have had discussions recently with the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. This is primarily a trade association led by Ray Chambers, and it's made up of 4 operating organizations. I think we mentioned before that you may see some of their names on things, but it would be like maintenance equipment. They do not operate any trains under their own names, but these are organizations that do contract operations for commuter authorities and others. They are very interested in expanding into intercity passenger rail. And we've had discussions with them in general. Herzog has approached us directly about this. And they have talked about their interest in working with states and other organizations to compete for passenger rail contracts. They say Amtrak, they're welcome to have Amtrak compete for contracts. They say that they can offer some advantages in terms of the quality of operation, on-time performance, relationships with railroads, et cetera. And just to give you a little bit of a taste, you certainly can't read the box on the lower right, but these are some of the operations that Herzog has around the United States. And some of the more well-known ones are the Caltrain commuter trains between San Francisco and San Jose, the Rail Runner in New Mexico. I think they have Tri-Rail in Florida. They do the streetcar in Kansas City, and they indicate that they actually carry more passengers annually on their operations than Amtrak does. And AI Pro really recently gave me this list of their 4 members and some of the operations that they currently run. So we mentioned Herzog. Keolis is a daughter company of the French National Railways. They actually, so their organization runs the TGVs in France, but they also have several in Canada and the US, such as the Virginia Railway Express. You have Transdev, and then you have recently came on board RATP Dev, who runs the DC streetcar and light rail in Tucson, as well as some other things internationally. And so they are an organization that is interested. They contacted us indicating that this corridor is one they think has some potential, and given all of the other aspects of it, the interest of the railroad, the condition of the track, the interest of our communities in seeing it going forward, that they think it has quite a bit of potential. So recently we did have a meeting with them that along with not only myself, but Jim Dunning, Bill Anderson, Eric Anderson, and Jeff Abbott, and we were able to talk to them about a concept they have called a market sounding, where they bring the four operators together and explore with a community or a corridor just what are the realities, the benefits, the potential, the challenges of putting a project together. They do need a sponsor for that, somebody who is has some ability to actually advance the ball if things go forward. And so we continue to talk to them about that, and we'll come back to that in a minute. When I showed this chart, I mentioned the Hartford line, which is actually an intercity passenger rail line. This is a schematic of it. The state of Connecticut decided that they wanted additional service implemented between New Haven, Hartford, and Springfield. And that's the red line you see on this map. Interestingly, there is already Amtrak service on that line, and there are other lines such as the Metro North commuter lines and some other commuter areas. And they did put this out to bid. They had a market sounding, and ultimately the state of Connecticut chose Herzog to operate this service. So again, we have this IIJA money coming forward. And I had a chance to participate yesterday in a webinar that 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin had online about intercity passenger rail, about transit, and about active transportation. And this was a slide that Arun had talking about the intercity or the corridor identification program to create a pipeline of projects. And so certainly an important thing to have done is to get on that pipeline whenever it's appropriate. And it would also be able to include funding for things like service development plans, possibly environmental studies. Arun indicated that FRA, I think they're actually required by law to release the program information in May. So that'll be something we'll be watching for. Other things that are coming up, we've been hearing that the Wisconsin State Rail Plan update will be coming out soon. We've been hearing that for a while. But the latest information is that a public outreach will be coming later this spring or in early summer, so that'll be important to watch. He did mention the Connexus plan, and then the FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan, which is a broad framework for where the Midwest might go. And the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, which we have talked about in the past, of which I am one of the commissioners, has a vision of taking advantage of a couple things. One is the IIJA does give an expanded role for multi-state commissions and preference in funding. And then MIPRC really requested that Midwest FRA study in the first place and is working on how legs might be put on it, how it might be implemented. And the commission right now is working with a consultant to put a grant request together to take that FRA Midwest plan, take the state rail plans of the states in the Midwest, and create a potential long-term corridor plan to move that forward. So that grant has not yet been applied for. They're waiting for a funding notice that would be for the appropriate kind of funding that they could go after, but that'll be something to watch as well. And then it seems like we've maybe had a fire hose of information coming at us after several years of having to create our own activities. And it's interesting to really get some perspectives on where things might go and how we might get there. We have had Rick Harnish from the High Speed Rail Alliance on as one of our guests, and they pretty regularly do brown bag webinars that we find quite interesting. They did one late last month on integrating high-speed rail and airlines, which we see a lot in Europe and other places. And Mike Schlichting, who is at University of Wisconsin-Madison, has been doing some research on this and gave a presentation at that webinar about how that might play out in Wisconsin with the Chicago to Twin Cities corridor. And this is a screenshot from that presentation where he talked about the short haul flights, how much air traffic might be replaced by high-speed rail, which is actually the advantage of the airlines because short haul flights are less profitable for them. And as you can see, Eau Claire is prominently featured on the map that he showed. Jeff Abbott actually viewed this and brought it to my attention. And Jeff, I think you have some kind of comments on how this might fit into our thought process as well.
Sure. One thing I was interested in listening in on this, and this took place last month, I think around March 25th, was the fact that it was announced not too long before this was presented that Eau Claire is going to be losing their scheduled air service from Chippewa Valley. So I'm thinking, wow, what's a good backup? And all of a sudden this popped up. And his presentation is based on the fact that short distance airline travel is very inefficient. And as you can see from this slide, it also, from the carbon footprint, it's very inefficient. It's inefficient because of the fuel cost. The aircraft are usually jets, and for the most fuel saving they get, they need to get up above 20,000 feet. But in a distance of the 200 miles, they don't do that. So their efficiency is way down. Also, the issue is, and probably mainly affecting Eau Claire, is crew availability. Coming off the pandemic and ramping back up to full airline service as it was in 19 isn't happening because the crews are there's not enough crews to meet the needs. And to train the crews now for new pilots coming in, there was a federal law change that, and I'm not 100% sure on the exact hours for new training, but it used to be 700 hours of training before you could go out and fly commercial. Now I think they doubled that. So it just moves that gap, creates a wider gap in between now and when they can actually ramp up with new crews. One thing he did mention is the fact that maybe the airlines will pair up with maybe high-speed rail and have some type of a connection between communities such as Eau Claire, but he focused in on Minneapolis and to Chicago, and that's like a I don't know, one and a half hour flight, but you fill in your hour to 2 hours before you board the plane because of security issues, and the fact that you have to get off and go through baggage and all that. But he did list that this is a very potential corridor that the airlines may also assist on. And I might say that Mike is a former United Airline employee. He started off on that, worked for a number of years on that with United and scheduling, all sorts of stuff. So he knows his business on the airline end, and he's made a very valid argument for high-speed rail. And I think this is another feather in our cap, or another potential source to help us out in getting rail back through Eau Claire, high-speed rail.
Okay, and I'll just go back to this at the very bottom, or you could just look at hsrail.org if you want to find it's under events. And they have actually some pretty interesting webinars that you can take a look at if you've never participated in them, and they're all recorded, so you can take a look at that. Thanks, Jeff. Just want to go back to sort of where we go from here. It's a little bit of a long update, but there's a lot going on. So we continue to work on frequent regional service as a possibility. Really, it's important to continue to focus on us being on a through corridor as our ultimate goal, from Chicago to Milwaukee to the Twin Cities. And then, of course, the immediate step that we could see implemented quite soon would be the shuttle connections. So did want to mention a few things to pay attention to or to watch. The Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission will be meeting in person in May. That meeting is still to be set up, but probably late part of May. They have now adopted the bylaws, and the idea of having in-person meetings a little bit longer is to really be able to start to flesh out what action that commission is going to take. And it may be that we can also talk to them about the market sounding. At the last meeting, Mason Baxter from AI Pro did participate and answered some questions about AI Pro. We have the FRA corridor identification process coming out probably in May. We'll be watching the MIPRC Midwest Plan, next steps. The Wisconsin State Rail Plan apparently is imminent, and certainly we're very anxious to see what's going to be in that. At some point, there'll be some release of what the Amtrak corridor analysis is. And then I think as we've discussed this, one of our most important priorities is going to be to see about requesting an AI Pro market sounding and what can we do to put the things together for that. I'll just mention, as long as I'm talking about dates, our board of directors meets on May 10th. Our next monthly meeting would be on May 19th. And as I already mentioned, the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission will be meeting in May. So we'll keep you informed of that. And as long as we're telling you about meetings, Mark, I know that All Aboard Minnesota is also meeting on Saturday this week and has a Zoom meeting. I think it's from 10 to 11:30 with some updates from the Minnesota perspective. Would you want to mention anything about that?
Sure. I'm involved with All Aboard Minnesota, and we're doing our annual spring meeting, and we're going to have Minnesota State Representative Alice Hausman speak on passenger rail topic issues. And then Kevin Rogenbach with the Great River Rail Commission will also speak. And then Frank Lotterly with MnDOT, Department of Transportation, with their freight and passenger rail office. He's going to kind of give us an update as to what MnDOT is doing and some of their short and long-term range plans for passenger rail. So, and then we have also invited Scott to speak, and he's going to speak on behalf of the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. If you haven't signed up, we can resend the link out. Scott did send the link out. It does just require a Zoom registration, but right now I think we're up to about 74 or 75 people for that meeting, and we have extra capacity. So if you want to join, we'd be more than happy to have you join, and you can register right up until the morning this upcoming Saturday. So if you've got time, or if you want the link, we can resend it out if you didn't see it. So,
all right, thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Just wanted to go back to this then, talk about organizing our objectives. I just want to bring this up quickly and come back to that in a minute, but working hand in hand with the commission that's being formed as it represents the public sector in our region. And then we brought this up before, and a few of you already volunteered, and that is, these are some of the task groups we could be putting together among our group to make sure we're advancing our goals. Communications, creating some clarity on what our goals are, really emphasizing the long-term goals and the case for passenger rail service, working on public-private partnerships, transportation planning. As we get rolling this year, legislative relations, and meeting with lawmakers and candidates to answer their questions about passenger rail service. Whenever things do move forward, there is going to be a need for matching funding for the federal programs, pursuing the shuttle and transit connections, and then also things, this might fit in communications, but working with allied groups, others that have similar goals of us. So I did a lot of talking here, and I think I want to see if there's any questions about any of the information I presented, and then maybe have a discussion about particularly the AI Pro market sounding. I think as the board has discussed it, and as we met with them, that seems to be a priority that we can do something about, and would need to take some action, try to get that scheduled in our area to see if we can move that part of the process forward. So I'm going to stop sharing. I can bring anything back up if anybody has any questions. But I'd be glad to answer questions about the updates and then maybe talk about what directions or actions you see we need to take. All right, looks like Jackie has a question. And you're still muted, so.
Yeah, my question has to do with the organizational aspects. I believe that was one of the advancing efforts, if you will, in terms of, is there anything as far as the communications and cooperative efforts or collaboration efforts between the commission, the Chippewa and St. Croix, and the Rail Coalition and our roles? Is there anything, any work going on with that?
So when the process, as I understand it, the resolutions were passed by the counties and municipalities. The resolutions actually designated 2 representatives from the Rail Coalition to be part of the organizing effort.
Right.
And those are Ann and me. And so we've been attending the meetings. They've actually been leaning on us. Some of you, I think, have sat in on those meetings to provide updates, to help with direction, that sort of thing. And then in drafting the bylaws for action by the commission as it moves forward, they felt it was appropriate that the actual voting members be those that are joined, who are actually the government organizations. But that's why they did include the ex officio side of it. So I guess my sense is that they continue to be wanting to engage with us and have us an integral part of that. Jim is actually the chair right now, and I see he's on, but he's away from his camera, so he may be away for the moment. But Ann has also been at those meetings. Ann, is my explanation about right?
Of course.
Yes, I'd say that's pretty good. They've been leaning pretty heavily on especially Scott's background and knowledge, and seems to be a pretty tight relationship.
And then Jim, of course, is on our board and is currently the interim chair. The bylaws actually call for them at their next meeting, now that they've passed them, to more formally elect a chair, vice chair, move forward in some of their organizational things. They have not dealt yet with budget and things like that. Some of that's going to depend on their role and what they can do moving forward. And of course, all of us here in Wisconsin know that unlike the rail authorities in Minnesota, where they have statutory authority to receive tax money and that sort of thing, there is the authority to work together on things, but they don't really have any way to actually raise money unless they can become part of budgets of the counties. But they also can play a very important role in coordination, making recommendations to WISDOT, that sort of thing. So that'll be one of the next discussions there.
That prompts a question for me too. You know, given the name Chippewa and St. Croix, I'm just wondering if you're looking at trying to secure resolutions from anybody in Chippewa County at this point in time, because that is underrepresented, if at all, you know. And so I'm curious what the goals are there.
Yeah, they were offered the opportunity to participate and declined.
Yeah, I understand Chippewa Falls did, but I
well,
said
so did the
Chippewa County
county.
being a broader, you know, I don't know what your intent is, but it is part of our plan here.
I think the reality is that we'll move forward with who we have. And then once, I think maybe once there's a stronger foundation of the direction, then there might be an opportunity to go back to those organizations. But they both declined. Both Chippewa County and the city of Chippewa Falls voted not to participate. I think that could be revisited. I think it's probably too soon. I think if the ball starts to move and it looks like things are going in a positive direction. I also know that there are people in Chippewa County who would really like to see them participate. There are some influential people. And we would need to get them engaged in working with members of the city council or county board to change that decision.
Okay. And maybe MPO has a role there too. I mean, the regional planning rather.
Yeah, I neglected to mention that Eric's been invited to those meetings and has generally participated, and they've
Good.
been
Because
appreciative.
it's not, it's almost similar to what goes on with the bus transportation and the transit issues between the counties. And now with the new jurisdiction of Hallie, that's another consideration there too. Mhm.
But certainly, station sites is going to be an important thing to have them involved in, and that starts to
Absolutely.
make it real. I did find out yesterday the MPO director from Madison was on the webinar I listened to yesterday, and they are actually going to put out an RFP to select a station site in Madison.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Of course, they had a lot of controversy over that 12 years ago.
Sure.
And so they're going to go at that again.
Sure.
Other questions about where we are on things?
This is Mark. Regarding Chippewa Falls, I'm often curious from the business community or, private business standpoint, how much engagement or how much interest, or even like with the chamber up there, do you think there might be where they could put maybe some more pressure on county or city officials to kind of maybe rethink or reevaluate? I don't know what your perspective, from the chamber, Scott, or from the business aspect of it, but any thoughts on that?
I think that's where it'll come from. I think the timing needs to be right. I don't know if the timing's here right now, but I do know of some people, and I would say they are from that bent, including our own Jack Hobleb. Jack can't be here on the 3rd. Well, actually, this is the 4th, but Jack, I don't think is on right now. But Jack, of course, is from Chippewa County. He's a very respected, well-respected business person there. So I think people like Jack, and there's some others that I've talked to, I think when the timing seems to be right to reintroduce the topic, I think we'll be able to do that, or we'll take another run at it.
Mark again here. One other question I kind of wanted to bring up, and this may or may not be something that can be answered, but I had a Wisconsin Transit Riders Alliance Board of Directors meeting yesterday. We're based out of Madison. I serve on their board, and they were looking at, bus connections, Amtrak throughway connections, and obviously they looked at the proposed shuttle connections for, Toma to Eau Claire, Rochester to La Crosse, and Madison to Columbus. And one of the things that came up with a few of our directors, they are curious to know why WSDOT has not ever looked at providing some type of connection between La Crosse and Eau Claire, without having to go all the way over to Toma. And I don't know if that's anything WSDOT has ever looked at, but from a connection standpoint, that especially with a few people that serve on our board from La Crosse, felt that there's always been a lack of good connecting transportation between La Crosse and Eau Claire. And I don't know, in conversations or stuff, if that's anything WSDOT or Arun have ever evaluated or considered. I just kind of wanted to throw that out as a concern.
I think Ian Ritz would be the one to communicate with that on, because he handles the intercity bus program.
Okay.
As you can guess, maybe not guess, but as soon as you get into the rules and how you put the funding together and the limited funding WSDOT has, which is probably one of the questions to explore as to whether WSDOT could get in the next budget more funding for the intercity bus program. We've been exploring that for the shuttle connection, because it may be that we could look at some intercity bus funds for that, but without getting into the weeds, it's more complicated than just asking WSDOT for some money. One of the thoughts is, like the Green Bay service, which you don't have to have an Amtrak ticket to use it. There might be some opportunities, for instance, for the Toma shuttle to also serve the VA there, and to serve multiple types of passengers, and the schedules would probably be okay for that. So I know Arun is working on things like cost estimates and working with transit, et cetera, to see how that can be put together. The La Crosse to Eau Claire, I don't know if it's ever come up. I know the state did subsidize an Eau Claire to Duluth bus route for a while, and they dropped it because of lack of use. But they do have the east-west route, and that actually was recently changed from Jefferson Lines to Megabus as the contractor for that. So All right, we've got about 15 minutes. Don't want to take any more time than that. Any other questions? I guess I know I've been working with, in particular, with the people who met with AI Pro from both the transportation planning side and for the like Bill and Jack who are interested in the public-private partnerships. The most likely scenario for that is to request WISDOT to request there be a market sounding, because they probably have the most ability to be a future sponsor of service given the current realities. We would certainly want the commission involved. So I think that may be a track we will go down. So I just interested in any input on that. I know Jim and Eric and others have been Bill have been part of those discussions. So if any of you have a perspective or others of you have questions about moving forward on that.
Scott, have you recently talked to Aaron about the sponsorship that Ray Chambers talked about in the meeting?
Yes. What we would need to do, and it may be that we would work with the commission on this too. I think we need to somewhat formally ask for that. So it would probably need to be a communication with the secretary saying that there is this interest. And I think perhaps if we and the commission approached the secretary and said, we'd like to see this done, I think that there is a case there for WISDOT to be looking at non-Amtrak, or in addition to Amtrak, I should say, alternatives for some of the corridors, in particular, since this is this would be there's no legacy service here, there's no existing Amtrak service, that it would be a fairly clean slate to look at. And of course, we also know that the AI Pro carriers have good relationships with the railroad. And that could be a factor in at least looking at this, because there's really no harm in figuring it out and seeing what the practicalities are and how the costs of implementing might be different than what Amtrak would do.
Would you see, excuse me, would you see that WISDOT and Aaron would be involved? How do I want to say? Ray Chambers talked about a pre-sounding system or approach to this thing. Would we be asking formally for funding or things like that? At what point, I guess, to run? Because if we could, as Ray mentioned, I think he mentioned or suggested anyway, if we could do a pre-sounding kind of thing where we get WISDOT and UP and our coalition together, we might be able to start moving things along that would pave the way for a formal letter to the WISDOT.
Yeah, I'm not sure which would come first, but I think we do need to get them talking. And those parties need to be there. I've also been trying to be an encourager of making sure that there is direct communication between Union Pacific and WISDOT and some other things like that. So yes, I think, and of course, this is more a public meeting, but we do want input here in our board of directors. When we meet, we can, make some decisions about what we want to do next. But I think there's a consensus forming that part of it is I want to hear if there's any objection to that, but that is a likely direction we want to go, because it certainly behooves us to check every possibility. And it seems like there's a lot of potential for one of the AI Pro carriers to be the operator of this service. Other comments or questions?
I just wanted to say, I certainly agree with pursuing the market sounding idea, because I think that's a way to get that public involvement as well. And it gives an opportunity for people to actually advance comments and et cetera, and considerations that might be very important as we continue our planning efforts. And so I like that idea a lot. And it's been kind of suggested both by Rick Harnish and Ray Chambers too, and in their presentations, the value of that process. So,
And then we're also very soon, we think, going to be seeing a draft state rail plan. And so that, we're
yeah,
anxiously awaiting that and what will be in it. And I think we anticipate it will be more robust and comprehensive than the last one.
I hope so.
So we'll see how that comes out. And so that'll be the other thing that we'll know soon. And then I think everybody's waiting to see how the FRA is going to approach that corridor process, because the first year of this, there are very, very few corridors that would be really ready to be implemented.
That's right.
And so there was questions about a pre-pipeline and some things like that. So we'll see what FRA does with all of that, because I think a lot of the states and entities said, well, we're not really ready to submit something today because this program was just started. Of course, FRA had the same issue, that the law was passed last fall, and then quite quickly they need to try to start implementing it. And we've had some of this discussions, particularly those of you that are transportation planners. FRA was very unready 10 years ago, or in 2009, when it was asked to move from being a safety agency to one that was actually fostering a rail expansion. And they've somewhat assured us that they are on board now, that they really want to be the one to move these things forward, and are actively ready to work with entities to make it happen.
Mhm.
I know Jeff kind of lived through some of that when he was working on it with WISTAT a few years ago.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Hopefully they got their processes down and how they're going to approach everything, because it was a unique learning experience for FRA, for those that were involved with it. And it also delayed a study by a year or two.
So we might have seen that Milwaukee to Twin Cities study a lot different had it come out on time and not been delayed by the FRA. So
Can I ask one question, Scott, going back? It goes back to Rick Harnish's presentation when he was talking about one of the great outcomes was that FRA was flooded with a lot of projects and proposed project proposals. But he mentioned the potential of Wisconsin networks, including the state rail plan one and the state coalition. And he makes the distinction between that and the service development plan. And I still have it, that it's something that's not spelled out very well, at least for me, to be honest with you. I can hardly remember the difference or the distinction between the state development plan and the state, the state rail plan. So do you have any ideas along that line? Can that be encompassed within, these pursuing these objectives, that falls in that area too, somehow?
I think that's one of the things we're waiting to see how our FAA will respond to that, because you do want a network approach, but then a service development plan tends to be really specific.
Exactly.
I don't know if Jeff or Ann or Eric would want to comment on that, but that a service development plan actually says how many trains you're going to run and what you're going to do, track and all that sort of thing.
It has more of the detail then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Rick may be on the call. If he wants to unmute and answer that question too, that might be good.
Oh, that would be really good.
Yeah, so it's two levels of detail. So the state should put together an overall structure for the entire state and look at each segment as part of a network. And then because you're looking at it as a total network, each segment has more ridership on it, so you can justify more investment in it, which means that the service is better, so you're bringing more riders. And in order to do that, you have to take this big picture view. So that is one thing the state should do, is this big picture network plan. The service development plan is actually coming into the segment by segment or route by route and doing a very specific plan for that segment. And I wouldn't wait for the big network plan to start working on specific segments or routes. But certainly the results are better if you have it. So they are two very different things. And what's supposed to happen out of the service development plan is you've got the structure down enough that you can move into doing the environmental work with a very narrow set of options. So there isn't a lot of time spent going into a lot of detail on various options that just aren't going to work. So hopefully that helped.
It does, it helps.
Okay.
And perhaps we could hope that at least the state rail plan might be a start on an overall network or if it doesn't, maybe that's one of the comments we make when it comes out.
Absolutely.
So, and of course we want the state to coordinate with Illinois and Minnesota too, because they're very much involved and all of the services aren't going to stay just within Wisconsin. So, all right, we just got a couple minutes. Are there any last comments or questions?
One
This
here,
is-
Mark
go ahead.
Anderson, if you,
Go
Mark,
ahead,
are
Bill.
you, okay. I'm just wondering if it's a possibility at all to get in-person meeting with the people that were in on the AI Pro meeting of last week or a little further back. There's a lot of urgency here from what Ray Chambers says. And if we were to have a meeting, say, before our next board of directors meeting, which is only 10, 11 days away, I understand that, but we might have something to present to the board from that meeting, which I think was just loaded with information and current things, really important things that we have to do and the intensity that we have to display with this thing to keep the AI Pro people happy. So if we could have, if there's a way we could have an in-person meeting, I think we could flush a lot of stuff out and really make our board of directors meeting worthwhile.
Yeah, Bill, I'll try to get back in touch with you and the others about that and we'll see what we can do.
Okay,
Mark,
good.
Mark, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, the one thing that I've been a little curious about as we continue to work, maybe with AI Pro and Herzog or figure out our third party operator and bringing the rail commission in, as far as getting our engineering rail study completed from a cost funding standpoint, do you think that formula will change or who helps, pay for some of that or whether, there will be different entities contributing money or maybe that's too far out yet to really know, but that's always kind of been on the back of my mind, I guess.
I don't think we know at this point. That's certainly going to be one of the factors, but it may have changed in terms of who does it and how it gets done. So, all right. I actually have to run off to a 9 o'clock meeting. I do have a hard stop today, but we do have one more minute. Does anybody else have any final comments? All right. Well, we appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks for joining us and we'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.